Do you like sensible tanks? Well, boy, do I not have one of those for you today. Greetings, I'm Herbert Erpaderp, and today I'm going to build this 35th scale OI 150 ton super heavy tank. This kit is from Takom, and if you want to have a look at the sprues and metal barrels and other gubbins that come in the box, I made a video about that a while ago. It's linked somewhere below, so feel free to go and check it out. Without further dilly-dally, let's get to the gluing together of the bits of plastic. First, we need a pair of gigantic idler wheels. These'll do nicely. There's some helpful keying here, so they go together with no issue at all. They are really nice. The drive sprocket, believe it or not, is also quite large.
Are you going to point out how large everything is?
Yes. No. Maybe. We'll see. The idea here is that you pin the inner half of the sprocket to the final drive part and leave it free rolling. There's enough friction in the pin that it'll stay there, though I did have to use quite a bit of force to get it into place. I also used glue, even though you don't really need to. We're also going to need several bogies. This pin goes into the swing arm, or whatever you might want to call this. I set that aside to bond, and to make sure there's no extra glue on it that might bond with the rest of the bogie. We don't want that. This is a road wheel, and once again, it is large.
Stop it! We know it's large!
Half of the road wheels get this little axle part. The fit is pretty tight, so you might need to use some pressure. The benefit of that is that they should all be nice and straight without too much effort. The wheel and axle then goes onto this bogie frame duva. Another wheel is then pressed onto the axle. The wheel halves have different detail on the hubs, so pay attention to that and make sure they're all around the same way as each other. These can be left to freely rotate if you want, though I didn't think it was that important. If I got glue on some of them and they didn't rotate, I wasn't really concerned. Then we insert the swing arm, making sure the more flat wheel hubs are positioned such that they'll be facing toward the hull when installed. The outer hubs have slightly more pronounced detail, they're a little bit more raised. The swing arm is held to the bogie with this cap. Do be careful with this. It's worth having it remain movable. It will make getting the wheels all nice and level much easier. To hold a very large idler wheel, we need a large idler wheel holder. The parts are shaped such that it should be pretty hard to put it together wrong, unless you're really determined. The inner half is made up of two parts, and then that assembly is glued to the outer part, making sure the idler wheel itself is sandwiched in between the two properly. It should be able to freely rotate, though it certainly doesn't have to. None of the running gear actually has to move, unless you really want it to. That assembly is then glued on at the front of the hull, like so. The drive sprocket assembly can then be glued on at the rear. It's nicely keyed, so it's very easy to get this right. The instructions seem to want the outer half of the sprocket installed after the tracks, but you can safely install it at any time. It's not going to hurt anything. In fact, in my opinion, it makes installing the tracks easier. It made sense to install the bogies next, so that's what I did. You can probably see how having the frame part being movable is beneficial. It's mostly because you can spin the bogies round and around like a fidget spinner, or like a record baby. These are kind of one-size-fits-all, for lack of better words, so if you were to glue all the swing arms to one side, for whatever reason, you'd end up with half of them being unusable. Also, it is just a lot easier to have them all movable. It's less work. Once you've got all the bogies on, you can sit the hull on its wheels, and they'll all be lined up nicely, and then, if you want, you can glue them all into place. So much easier than trying to eyeball it. This shackle is being attached to its mounting bracket. For whatever reason, the instructions want this done before gluing either part to the hull. It's not especially difficult, but it is probably a bit easier to glue the bracket on and then add the shackle later. I don't suppose it really matters which way you choose to do it, as long as you get the bracket mounted the right way up. You don't want to run afoul of the OI Bracket Society. They really mean business. Next, I assemble a set of brackets, different brackets, with return rollers on them. This is pretty simple, just make sure you're using the correct parts. You should end up with 6 of them. Surely you can count to 6, right? I can, I think. When you're ready, those can be installed along the sides of the hull like so. There is keying for these, and it should be pretty obvious if you've got them on upside down. Don't put them on upside down. I follow that with more return rollers. These are different parts to those on the brackety bits. You can probably, realistically, omit these. Not that they're hurting anything, just the way I did the tracks, they're not totally necessary and won't be visible. You might save yourself some valuable seconds. Here's a mistake. I know, you are shocked to hear that I, Herbert Erpaderp, have made a mistake. But it's true. It's my first ever. What are you laughing for? You're meant to drill holes here into these tiny little guide holes. The instructions didn't do a fantastic job of actually pointing out where to drill though. I misunderstood and drilled out the larger holes you can see on the back of this plate. At some point, I'm going to have to fill those in. I don't think I showed myself drilling the correct holes, but I did. You're just going to have to trust me. The holes they want you to drill are for the handles for climbing up on the hull, so they're probably a little bit important. It is better to learn from other people's mistakes, so learn from my mistake and don't make it yourself. You're welcome. At this point, I'm gluing on these strips, which are mounting points for more return rollers. The circular bit on these should line up with the other circular mounts. And then, more return rollers. Again, make sure you are using the correct rollers in the correct positions, or else. Or, you could probably omit a few if you want. As before, they're not going to be visible, and unless, for whatever reason, you want the tracks to actually be completely movable, you don't really need all of them. Anyway, would you look at the time? That's right, it's time for tracks. These are the least fun part of this kit. I don't normally have a problem with individual links, in fact, I quite like them, but these could really have been done better. The two halves of the link go together like so, which is fine, though you do have to make sure to sandwich the next link into place before gluing them, otherwise you'll end up with a pile of singular links that won't go together. It's the gluing that's the annoying part here, especially if you want the links to move, and you probably do, so that they go around the drive sprocket and idler wheel. All you really have to do is be careful, which, while not impossible, is a little bit easier said than done. The problem is that it's quite time consuming. Often with individual links, because you don't really need to be paying a lot of attention, you can sort of autopilot the build, maybe while watching a movie or some high quality Herbert Erpaderp videos. That's not really the case with these tracks. You kind of need to be paying attention to avoid gluing the links together. I made life a little bit easier for myself by only having enough track to wrap around the sprocket and idler wheel be movable. The rest are glued flat and solid. Adding the guide horns should, in theory, be easy. They come mounted on this sprue, which acts as a jig. Unfortunately, they don't really fit. The space between the horns doesn't match up with the holes. This could be user error, I wouldn't be surprised, but in this case I don't think so. Gluing each guide horn into place is not the hardest thing in the world. It obviously would have been a bit easier if the jig design had worked as intended though. I've finally glued the outer half of the drive sprocket into place, which is simple enough. I test fitted and figured that it would actually make installing the track a bit easier, so that's why I've put it on. Installing the tracks seemed like a fairly logical next step, and you can see that I had a long set of solidly glued links along the bottom. The flexible tracks are then kajiggered into place over the idler and drive sprocket. It's pretty simple. Once I've got the links where I want them, I glue them into place, which is about as simple as it looks. I do it in steps so that if anything needs holding, it's only one thing, not a whole bunch of things. You can see that I didn't install an entire run of tracks. I figured it would probably be very difficult and annoying to actually complete the tracks. The side plates are going to hide almost all of the upper run of tracks anyway. It's time to install the side plates, which are huge. It's pretty easy to get these parts on. There is keying, at least at the front. If I was to do this again though, I might be a bit more careful and try test fitting with the upper hull part. I don't know for sure, but I feel like doing that might help to avoid a couple of minor fit issues later on. I followed that by installing the front plate. I had to use a bit more force than I was expecting to get this to sit properly in place. Nothing outrageous, just a little bit more than I was expecting. I then installed the headlamps, or as the Japanese say, headrampu. Not quite as entertaining as Scheinwerfer, I guess. Now that we have a front plate, we can put these shackle brackets on. This time, the shackle itself has been left off until later. I didn't show myself installing the shackle, but as you'll probably see later, I did, in fact, do so. Now that some time has passed, and I've installed the right-hand tracks and side plate, why not assemble some mufflers? This is not very difficult, though you might want to focus your gap elimination efforts around the exhaust pipe. The sides of the muffler won't really be seen, but the pipe will. Once those two parts are together, I add this piece of pipe which presumably comes from the engine. As long as you're using the correct parts, there shouldn't be any problems with this. I think it's about time to put the whole top on. This almost dropped right into place, and the fit is pretty good at the front. It's also not the worst at the rear, though it did take a little bit more kajiggering to get it to sit how I wanted it to. It's okay, just not exactly right. The whole top is not totally flush with the whole side, here where the sloped part is. I would say this is a very minor problem, and the fit is still pretty good. And like I said earlier, if there was more test fitting while installing the side parts, it would probably look a lot better. Anyway, the top of the hull is in place, so now the mufflers can be installed. Getting the pipe that joins with the hull into place was a little bit fiddly, but nothing you would call a real challenge. I did have to apply some pressure on the left side because that muffler wanted to sit a bit high, but again, not a real challenge. At the front of the hull, I install 3 vision devices. These are made from clear plastic. Speaking of clear plastic, there are also lenses for the headlamps, which I left off for painting and probably forgot to mention. Moving right along, I install the butt plate, which is the true and real technical term for this part. With a little bit of pressure, it goes into place easily. Like with the upper hull, I did have to apply some pressure to get things lined up properly, particularly on the left. This was a bit annoying, but not the worst thing. Why not install the covers for the vision devices? These are about as easy to get into place as the vision devices themselves are, which is to say, very easy. I then add these, whatever they are, to the rear hull. I assume these are mounts for machine guns or something like that. I'm sure somebody suggested that when I didn't know what they were on the 72nd scale OI that I built. Why not also add these doodads? They're keyed, so they go on nice and easy. That's almost everything we need to do for the hull, so why not commence turret time? For the forward turrets, I assemble the gun mount, or is it a mantlet? I'm obviously not an OI expert, so how would I know? Whatever it is, it's pretty easy. It seems that opening in the bottom should be there, so don't fill it in. This kit comes with metal guns, but if for some reason you wanted, you could use the plastic ones, though they do need to be glued together. I'm obviously going to use the metal ones. They simply sit in the little raised rib on the side part here. It gets sandwiched between that and the other side part, as you can see. It's held in place quite nicely, so you don't need to use any glue with this. I didn't want to get the super glue out anyway. I glue the top part on, which pretty much just plops right into place. I think it looks really good. I was impressed with how nicely and easily this went together. Metal gun barrels always just look nice, plus they're usually easier to work with. Now for the rest of the turret. I start by gluing the rear walls to the bottom part. The fit is pretty good, and the keying should ensure that it's relatively close to being vertical, but to make sure they line up properly, I quickly add one of the side parts. It doesn't matter which side part you add, the process is the same. I then install the little bit that goes around the gun. This was kind of a mistake. My second ever mistake, believe it or not. On the second forward turret, I installed this later. The reason for that is it made installing the gun just a little bit annoying, and it would have been a lot more difficult had I waited for the glue to bond, so I suggest adding the surround bit, whatever it's called, after the gun and both side walls. I played with the elevation and decide on sensible, and then the other side of the turret pretty much drops right into place. I add some more glue on the inside just to make sure nothing moves in ways I don't approve of. It made sense to follow that with the roof, and like the rest of the turret, it's a good fit and goes into place with no issue. You may need to apply some pressure, but I wouldn't consider that an issue. There is a hole in the top of the turret, and to fix that, I make a cupola. You need to make 4 of these because they are the same for every turret. This is quite simple, though getting these 2 parts together did require a little bit more force than I was anticipating. The 2 halves of the hatch go into place nice and easily, though do pay attention to which side goes where. Because the cupola is keyed, you can, apparently, put the hatches on the wrong way around. This is my 3rd ever mistake. It seems the part with more detail, that little round thing and the mounts for the handles, sit toward the rear of the turret, so a couple of mine are wrong. I don't know if this is the kind of cupola where the hatch can rotate, but I suspect not. I'm not hugely bothered by this, but if you are, I would suggest not making the mistake yourself. The second turret is very similar to the first, just a bit bigger. I begin with the main armament, with the same sort of surroundy, mantlety, whatever it is. As I just said, it's pretty much the same as the first one, though this time we do get a choice of gun. You can select either one of these very nice metal guns, or the less nice, but still very good, plastic guns. I obviously chose metal, and the more thick one. Unlike the first one, this gun does seem to want to flop around a bit. I didn't want to get the superglue out, so I put some blue tack there to hold it just enough that it won't fall out of place. I know it's green, but it is blue tack. Trust me. I then add the side and top parts, which do fit quite well. This time though, there was a little bit of gappage forming at the front, so I had to apply some pressure there. The cannon will be held in place with these, holdy bits.
Are you in your technical terms, Herbert?
These are a fairly tight fit, so you could probably get away with not gluing the gun into place, though I will eventually do that. The holdy bits provide a good, fairly solid way to glue the gun into the turret bottom part. I then install the side parts. It doesn't matter which side you start with, just make sure you are using the correct parts. On the left side, that little detaily bit next to the gun should look like a B, a lowercase b. If it looks like a P, you have it on the wrong side, and somebody's gonna get mad. Not me, I don't care, but somebody. I add some extra glue on the inside to make sure everything's bonded good and proper, and to make sure the gun won't move. The back wall then goes into place, which is just as easy as the other walls. Then, surprise surprise, the roof. The fit is pretty good, though not quite perfect. I had to apply some pressure at the front, and the gap isn't perfectly consistent all the way around the top. I don't know how precise the Japanese were with their tank construction. Probably a bit more precise than the Russians. Either way, this is fairly decent, though if you really felt the need, you could do a bit of sanding and make it a perfect fit. Obviously, I didn't. I then glue the cupola into place, which, like the other turrets, fits quite well, though it is backwards. I'm sure nobody will notice that, right? Here's a demonstration of what happens when you put the loader's hatch parts in the wrong way around. This is not my fourth mistake, it's a demonstration. You can tell because I didn't glue the parts into place wrong. I do recommend you put them in the correct location, and then glue them into place so they can't move. They probably won't, but you never know. The big turret has big doors on the rear. There are some handy guide slots for these, which makes installation nice and easy. You can't model them open, not without a lot of effort, but there's no interior, so I don't know why you would, or why I would even bring it up. This little thing, which I think is probably a machine gun mount, I'm sure somebody probably told me when I did the smaller OI, and I've forgotten. Either way, the part is keyed, so to put it on wrong would be a challenge. Like the other turret, I've decided to leave all the handles off until later. Now it's time for the rear turret. This one is a bit different to the first three. I start by gluing a side part onto the bottom part. Again, it really doesn't matter which side goes first, they're pretty much the same. Then I place the little mantletty part for the twin machine guns into that hole there. It will stay there with friction, at least long enough to get the other side part into place. Doing it this way seems much easier than trying to install the gun mantlet later on. Before going any further, I thought it might be fun to test fit this outer part. It probably has a technical name, but believe it or not, I don't know it. I then add the rear wall. Like all the other walls, this has a nice guide to help you get the positioning right. And then, a roof. It fits pretty good, like all the other roofs. I then glue the turret front on, confident due to the test fitting that it was going to fit. And it does. I also glue the gun mount into place. As with all the others, you can leave it unglued and movable, but I've chosen not to. Painting it would probably just stick it into place anyway. Then, gun barrels. Unfortunately, we don't get the option for metal barrels for these. The plastic parts do look pretty good, so I'm not complaining. Not much anyway. I then add another, probably backwards, cupola, and we end up with another nice looking turret. That's 4. 4 turrets. I then used the convenient locking tabs to begin putting the turrets onto the hull. Then I remembered that I had a whole bunch of tiny little handles to add. Every turret's cupola gets a small handle on it. Because of its size, it's a little bit fiddly to get them into place. You might notice that some of these handles have nubbins. I figured it would be a bit easier to remove the nubbins after gluing them into place, and it was. It's a bit easier to hold them for cleanup when they're attached to an entire turret, and there's a smaller risk of breakage and droppage. Don't want to feed the carpet monster now, do we? The forward turrets have a pair of handles on their back doors, and these were a bit easier than the previous handles because they're a little bit bigger. Again, once they're bonded into place, they'll be cleaned up. I didn't leave this until last because it was going to be hard, it's mostly just to avoid breakage through the rest of the build. These are fairly delicate parts. Even the bigger ones are still fairly delicate, like these large boys on the back of the main turret. Don't forget the 2 smaller handles on the loader's hatch. The OI Loaders Society would never forgive you, and nor would I. It's probably a good idea to also remember the hull. There's a small handle on this hatch here, and then quite a few all down the hull sides. As long as you've drilled the holes correctly, these aren't difficult to get into place, just a little bit time consuming. There's one. Now do the rest. Now do the rest. You can see I did eventually do the rest. That's a lot of handles. I still haven't filled in the incorrect holes I drilled on the left side of the hull, but I will eventually, maybe, do that. Probably. Anyway, that's it. The 35th scale Japanese OI 150 ton super heavy tank from Takom is now complete. There is a crew figure that I've not included, surprising nobody, and I will say that I did appreciate that you get some clear goggles for the crew figure from the clear sprue. That's kinda cool. I still didn't feel like adding a crew figure though, so I didn't. As you might imagine, and I guess can see, this really is a very large model. It's almost as big as the 16th scale T-34 that I've got.
Cool story, Herbert.
Mm-hmm. For the most part, I had fun putting this kit together. I didn't really enjoy the tracks, though I will say I have had less fun doing tracks. Not on many occasions, but one or two. It may, or may not, surprise you to learn that the majority of time I spent on this kit was in working on the tracks. They do look good, it's just not a great design, in my opinion. It's far too easy to accidentally glue the moving parts together. All that said, they're not that bad, and you can certainly save yourself some time by gluing large sections solid so they sit flat. The rest of the build was quite enjoyable, and there were no major problems. I did drill holes in the wrong place. That is a problem, but not one with the kit itself. There were a couple of very minor fit issues with the upper hull part, which were almost entirely remedied by pressure. I have come to expect a fun, well-engineered and designed kit from Takom, and so far they've not let me down. I've enjoyed the build, and I think the result is a really nice looking model of a quite interesting vehicle. Interesting, and kind of ridiculous, which is right up my alley. Is it 100% historically accurate? You'll never believe this, but I don't know. I'm not an OI scientist, but I'm sure Takom used all of the information they had available to them to make this as accurate as they could. It wasn't exactly a mass-produced vehicle, and I'm pretty sure the prototype doesn't exist anymore, so they can't exactly go and measure it, you know? What matters, at least to me, is that it looks the part in all of its interesting and, quite frankly, ridiculous glory. I do like me some ridiculous tanks. Maybe you do too. Let me know what you think in the comment section below. If you'd like to watch me build kits like this one live, I stream modelling a couple of times a week. There's a link in the description. Subscribe here if you want to see more of this kind of thing. Share the video with anybody you think might find it helpful. And if you really like what I do, and you want to see videos a bit early, consider supporting on Patreon. There's a link for that in the description too. Take care of yourselves, be excellent to each other, and thanks for watching. Farewell.